We will identify stress. I'm sure you all can identify it your own, but it comes in various shapes and sizes. And then we're going to talk about addressing stress in law practice for yourselves and also in helping others. Stress versus burnout. So if you're just having a normal response, stress can be a positive or a negative. Burnout and maximal stress, whole different ball game. There's a description here of burnout. If you've ever had it, you don't really need the description. The next step is acceptance. You can say to yourself, no, that's not a panic attack. I've got work to do. I'm going to ignore that. You can deny it all day long.
My name is Nina, and I'll be the moderator for this webinar. I wanted to start out by giving a bit of background on our speaker, Lynn Garson. Lynn Garson is an attorney, mental health advocate, and author. In July 2012, she published Southern Vapors, a memoir describing her journey from major clinical depression to recovery, and has since spoken widely, including a TEDx Emory talk, reforming the approach to mental health in the U.S. She has also made numerous presentations to private and public organizations, including the American Bar Association, local and state bar associations, the American Health Lawyers Association, the Georgia Hospital Association, and the Association of Legal Administrators. In her work as an attorney, Ms. Garson practices healthcare law in the Atlanta office of Baker and Hostetler. Her areas of expertise include physician practice acquisitions, employment, and independent contractor and related agreements. The webinar presentation you are about to watch will be approximately 1 hour, and Lynn will be joining us live for audience questions as soon as the presentation is complete. If you have any questions for her throughout the presentation, please feel free to submit them by clicking that Q&A button at the control panel at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, here is Lynn to discuss balancing the scales, practical stress management for lawyers.
Hi, everybody. The title of this webinar is Balancing the Scales, Practical Stress Management for Lawyers. I'm Lynn Garson, and I will tell you a little information from the beginning. If you struggle with more than occasional stress, this program is offered to provide information and tools for you. It's for all lawyers, judges, firms, corporations, everybody, including the judiciary, who often does not avail itself of some of these sorts of programming and I think can use it. And the biggest takeaway I want you to get is that this is not an insoluble problem. It's not intractable. There are tools, there are tips, but managing stress in your practice does require you to learn a lot about yourself. And if you're not used to that, that's a pretty big ask. And I think it's in direct proportion to how stressed you are, how willing some people are to take that on, because it's a lot of work. And we'll talk more about that later. My information is on here for you. My cell phone is on there for a reason. I am available, and my email, I am available if anyone wants to contact me outside of the webinar or outside of the way that Justia gives you to get in contact with presenters. I'm available for that. If someone is struggling and they want more information or just to reach out to me, that is perfectly fine. That's what I'm here for. You'll see as we talk about this, wherever you are, I have been there, and I am very happy to talk about my experience and give you the benefit of whatever I can. So now the agenda, very simple. I'm going to introduce, in fact, I think we've pretty much done that. Very importantly, I'm going to give you a framework. I think lawyers do well with a framework and something concrete to look at. And the framework that I'm going to give you is not of my own devising, but I think it's very, very good. We will identify stress. I'm sure you all can identify it your own, but it comes in various shapes and sizes. And then we're going to talk about addressing stress in law practice for yourselves and also in helping others, because I know people have questions about what can they do to help a colleague that they're concerned about. So let me introduce myself in a little more detail. I was encouraged to put this slide together. I think it's a great idea because it shows you just how much we as attorneys can hide what's really going on, how we can wear the mask, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So you'll see on the left side, by all appearances, JD ordered the Coif. Sutherland Asbill was a big Atlanta firm. They're now Evershed Sutherland, pretty big firm. Paul Hastings, interesting life abroad, counsel a couple of times, counsel at McKenna Long in Atlanta, now with Baker Hostetler, about 11 or 12 years. So great, good resume, good CV, right? So then you look at the right side, mental health journey. And that is a very different story. And I am telling you that at any given moment, as you scan through this and you see family medical leave for 10 weeks, that's Shepherd Pratt is a very fine mental health facility in Baltimore. I went back to another facility for weeks, just a year and a half after that. No one knew if I didn't want them to know. And that is the truth. If I chose to divulge to somebody at work because I needed at least one person maybe to know what was going on, that was my choice. Otherwise, no one ever knew. And I can tell you that if you see the fifth or sixth line down on the right side, couldn't eat, sleep, or breathe, lay on floor of office. I would go into work and I would have to lie down on the floor. We didn't have locks on the doors. So I would put my feet to the door so nobody could open it. And I would lie on the floor just to try to breathe. That was in maybe November of 2007, actually, December of 2007. Closed 2 back-to-back transactions, December of 2007. While this was all going on, and while no one knew at work that this was going on, it continued. And when I say it, couldn't eat, sleep, or breathe, didn't want to get out of bed, depressed, anxious, everything but the kitchen sink. And I still got up for 6 months and went into the office and did the work until I literally could not do it anymore. At that point, my brother was instrumental in getting my parents to pay for what was a very costly stay at Shepherd Pratt back in 2008. And you will see there that I was diagnosed for major clinical depression, generalized anxiety disorder, bipolar 1, panic disorder, complex PTSD, and binge eating disorder. Hardly seems possible, right? But that's exactly what was going on all the months and months that I was still working. So I went to that facility, and after 3 weeks, they told me that my prognosis was fair to good with ongoing intensive treatment. And I said, what does that mean? 3 to 4 times a week therapy. And I said, oh no, you're going to make me well. You're the experts. I'm going back to work. And when I got out, indeed, I did go back to work. I did not listen to what they had said. And I did end up in a quite different facility in the state of Georgia, where it was me and getaway car drivers and people with tracks on their arms because they'd injected themselves with crack mixed with rat poison. It was an interesting experience. And the director of that facility said at the family meeting, and this is a quote, "You will never work again. You should apply for Social Security disability." Those were the hardest words I think I ever heard, because that was not the script that I'd written for myself. But I believed the experts, and I did ultimately hit send on the application. Hardest thing I ever did. At the same time, I was looking for jobs. And I did get a job in 2011, just about a year after he said that. And that was at the job right before McKenna Long. And then as a group, we moved to Baker Hostetler about 5-6 years ago. I have made reference at the bottom of the mental health journey side, 2 articles I wrote that really are deep dives into everything I know. First one, in fact, is titled Everything I Know About Suicide, which is a fair amount, having been pre-suicidal myself. meaning that I didn't have a plan, but I was pretty close. And then the language of asking for help, because I do believe that you have to be strategic when you're asking for help. So take a look at those articles if you're interested, because I do believe, as I said, that asking for help in this day and age in a law firm of medium or large size, you still have to be strategic. I'll talk a little later. There is still stigma. We all know it. But there are ways to work around it and be creative, and that article does talk about that. Um, a few things I want to tell you before we get started. And I do also want to tell you, I know some people are sitting here saying, what does this have to do with stress? She's talking about mental health facilities and diagnoses and articles about suicide. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about those things. I will tell you, and I always say this, I'm worried about people who are stressed. I'm more worried about people who are burned out. I start getting maximally worried about people who are having panic attacks or sliding into relapse, for example, if they are in recovery from substance use disorder. So it's progressive. I'll show you a spectrum that I have on that soon. But I will talk to you about stress, I promise. But I want to talk about a couple of other things first. So these are surprises to many people. Recovery from mental health challenges and substance use disorder is not linear. I used to think it was like you get on an airplane, the airplane goes up, hard climb going up, but then you level off and it's all good. It is so not like that. And if you're working with family members or friends or colleagues, do not expect that. It is as nonlinear as anything could be. It's more like up and down and up a little bit, down, up a little more, down some more, up. Um, that's not a failure by anybody, is how it is. Similarly, people think that just as I did, that 10 weeks at Shepherd Pratt, I should be fixed. Why I thought that and why anybody thinks that they can fix in a number of weeks or even months a problem that, as you saw in the first screen, I've had since I was in my teens. I can't imagine, but we do seem to think that. It's again, couldn't be further from the truth. It takes time. We talk about experts. I thought the folks at Shepherd Pratt were experts. They were very good at their job, but I will tell you, I was lucky that I had a good relationship and it worked for me, the therapist that I had there. There were others who got very fine folks as therapists. They simply did not form a good relationship, and they spent all that money and did not come away with as much of a good result as I did. And then finally, fix is the wrong lens to use here because it implies that the expert is going to do all the work. And that is so not true. The person who is doing the work was me. And if you struggle with some of these issues, it has to be you. Nobody else can do this for you, or no one could do it for me, although I really didn't believe that for many years. I only got better when I did believe it and took responsibility for my own recovery. And that's true. On to stress, finally. I know you're excited. What I can and can't help with, and I know you know this, I can't help with your billable hours requirements, your caseload, if you're a public defender, all the stresses that you're under, deadlines, uh, what's been true for a number of years now, being on call via text or email 24/7. It's like being in the ER, being an ER physician. I feel I'm on call 24/7. There is no moment in time when I'm not expected to look at my emails and be available to answer something. For my own part, I'm actually going to take steps to make changes with that. I no longer desire that to be part of my practice, and I can do it. I'm in a fortunate position to be able to do that. What I can help you with is some things that you might not be aware of that you are doing unconsciously that make things worse or at least don't make things better. And I can also give you a few tips, hopefully, that will help you in trying to manage all of this. Because, as we know, it can be pretty unmanageable. Very recently, it got very unmanageable for me. And that's why I'm very vigilant, even more than I was a couple of months ago, about staying on top of my own stress and doing what I can to manage it within myself and with the client and with the partners that I work with. So now we're going to talk about the framework. And this is what I consider to be the most important slide. Well, there are a couple that I consider important, really important, but this is one of them. So here we have the well-being continuum, which, as I say, I was not the author of this. I find it incredibly useful, for one thing, because we have really conflated wellness with other concepts over time. Wellness and well-being are sort of used interchangeably to mean anything from yoga to going inpatient. And I got very confused at a certain point about what were we really talking about, and what is the structure of this. So this was great for me. I hope it will be for you. I will tell you that I know at any given moment exactly where I am on this continuum and what I might need to do to address where I am. And part of the basis of this entire talk is that you will do the same for yourself. So at the left side, wellness, which is prevention, and we'll talk in the next slide. I've got a lot of examples of what people do for prevention. For me, what this is, even if you feel like you're not really stressed out now, this is money in the bank. This is reserves for when, if, for example, a big case comes in and you've been just cranking along, everything's fine. Well, all of a sudden you've got to go into high gear, and it goes on and on and on, and you're on call all the time. You will have money in the bank at that point if you are in the habit of doing preventative care, or preventive care, as the slide says. Um, Moving more towards the center, and it is a spectrum. There's no point where you go from, I'm no longer well, I need intervention, I need mental health support. But there can come a time, and it doesn't mean that you're not just stressed. It can just be stress, but it can be stress to the point where you need outside support. And there are all kinds of forms of outside support, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Then you can move to where I went, which is all the way to the end of the spectrum, which is suicidal ideation. And as it says, hopelessness and despair are the hallmarks of suicidal ideation. That's crisis. And as I'll say later, that's a 911 or the new 988 call, period. That's it. If you are with someone, and hopefully even you yourself. I still had enough of a desire to live that I tried to get help myself. People are not always in that place. And if you're helping someone like that and they're to that point, it's an emergency. And you know that. Now, the two lines that I have here also I didn't make up, but they're perfect. Recognize each stage and act accordingly. Okay, we're all lawyers. That makes perfect sense. You probably think, why did she even bother to say that? Self-help strategies that are great for wellness no longer work when we need proactive and external mental health support. Okay, goes without saying. However, the propensity of lawyers is to overuse self-help even when it is no longer appropriate. Sound familiar? Most lawyers are like that. We try to bulldoze our way through it. We put off taking care of ourselves. The work comes first. And what this slide tells you is, please take care of yourself. Please know where you are on the spectrum, and please take care of yourself. I can't say it any more plainly. So wellness, millions of ideas for wellness. And I've got them into buckets. They could be in other buckets. These are just descriptors that I thought of. For example, listening to music is very soothing to me. Swimming is very soothing to me. Swimming is my meditation. I could have put that under meditation. It's not for others. For others, swimming is aerobic exercise. So whatever works for you, I will only focus on one thing, is breath work. We'll get to a slide a little bit later on that talks about when we really get all ramped up and where our cortisol is pumping and all that. I'm not a yogi. I've not been to an ashram, but I will tell you, anyone, including me, is now well aware that calming deep breaths can be the ticket in certain instances. And we all need to learn how to do that. Whether you think it's, alternative hokum or not, is it's biological and it's evidence-based. So you can look at all of these at your leisure. I know that you'll have the PowerPoint. Mental health support. So I think people think only of a therapist when it's mental health support, but there are a lot of different things to think about. If you're with a larger entity, like a medium to large size law firm, perhaps a corporation, most of them have employee assistance programs. They offer a certain number of sessions with a licensed clinical counselor. I highly recommend that you avail yourself of those and that you talk. It's usually the HR person that is the keeper, the gatekeeper for that. HR used to be the enemy, frankly, many years ago. In my experience, they no longer are. They're on the side of the angels. They want to help people. Before you even need it, go talk to your HR person and find out what is available to you. What's the employee assistance program like? And get to know about it. Lawyer assistance programs, similar. Every single state has one. There are a number of prepaid sessions that are offered in, I think, every state. I'll talk more about those later. You can go to a trusted person or a mentor. It does not have to be a licensed counselor. It's got to be somebody you trust. That's critical. It has to be somebody you trust. Then, of course, counseling, therapy, psychiatric assessment, or medical intervention, all of the above. Peer-to-peer support, now we're so used to doing things virtually. There is a tremendous amount of peer support available online. In person often is a little, for me, more of a connection. But I will say, as chair of the Georgia Lawyer Assistance Committee, I was gratified. We've got some psychologists on the committee as just for informational purposes. And to a person, they said after COVID that they had expected that they were going to report that virtual couldn't hold a candle to in person. And in fact, they were pleasantly surprised that that was not true, that they thought that they formed a very good connection and could give very good support virtually and remotely as well. So that's great news. There are some off the beaten track programs, like a place called On Site in Tennessee that I've been to. They have a rehab facility, but they've also got a main facility that you can only go if you don't need rehab or mental health intervention, don't need to be in a facility, because what they do is if you have issues that you want to work on, they provide experiential therapy, which is role play and things like that, that can be very, very helpful. And they're not the only ones in the country. There are a number of them. So you could look into that. There are rehab facilities everywhere. You would be shocked how many rehab facilities there are if you're even in a medium-sized city. You drive by it every day and you have no idea. And I have learned that about Atlanta, Georgia, which is where I'm from. And partial outpatient, intensive outpatient, inpatient, all kinds of facilities are available. And I had not put on here, but then I thought later, which comes a little bit under trusted person, is a coach. There are many, many people who have stopped practicing law and have learned, they've gotten coaching certificates, but they've done deep dives into it. It's not like they've gone to an online program and checked a box. They really know what they're doing. I, in fact, have hired somebody myself as a stress coach. I may be standing here talking to you about this, but I am well aware that there are times when I don't practice what I preach and that I need some help. Absolutely, disciplining myself to practice what I preach. So this is a wonderful person. I'm making strides in it. It's a work in progress, and I highly recommend that kind of thing. Briefly, suicide, we talked about before. I just want you to know that there is a new 988 national crisis number. It connects you to your home state crisis line. I'm not positive how well it's functioning yet. That's why I have call 911 and that number. Make sure that you know both numbers. Hotline, texting home to 741-741 for folks who like to text is a wonderful option. It's got other information on there. And also, if you're interested in becoming educated about knowing how to deal with someone who is suicidal, there's a lot of training for that. It is not intuitive, believe me. As much as I talk about this, I have been confronted with that, and it was not intuitive at all. I scrambled, and I wish that I'd had this kind of training. I think you scramble anyway, if it's something that comes out of the blue. So, anyway, those are some options for you. So now, identifying stress in law practice. Here we are. You may have seen this. It looks old, 2016. You're like, why is she showing me something from 2016? This is the gold standard. Patrick Krill, who is the father of the mental health programming journey in this country, also has put out numerous studies and is also a consultant and does a tremendous amount of work. He, along with some others, did this study with 13,000 lawyers, as you see, in 29 states. So huge study. And this is what they came up with. So anxiety and stress, and I'm not sure how they differed between the two, but we're cranked up over 100% if you add the two together. I will also just say that this was self-reports. So this does not include people who may suffer from some of these issues but didn't report. So the numbers are higher. And this is 2016, before we ever went through COVID. I think the numbers are quite a bit higher. And if you're reading the news and watching, what's going on, if it's not you, if you've got teenage children or young adults, it's them. In large measure, the numbers are beyond alarming for that part of society. And I think a large number of lawyers have children in that category. And like I said, if you're worried about a child who's in some of these states, you also are under a tremendous amount of stress. This, I think you've probably heard over and over, especially during COVID, that we were under fight or flight for 2.5 years. You're supposed to be in fight or flight mode for all of 10 seconds, while instinctively you figure out saber-toothed tiger, is the tree close enough? Is the cave closer? That's it. That's all that is supposed to be. And it was very interestingly explained to me that when we're in that mode, our prefrontal cortex, which is fight or flight, borrows from our cognitive function because it doesn't have a cognitive function. It does not have an executive function. It's pure instinct. You need a cognitive function to decide which tree, which cave, which is closer. And that is why when we're having a big cortisol dump, we get foggy, we can't concentrate, we'll blink our eyes and look at the screen again, and it still doesn't come into focus. That's exactly why, which I thought was actually very interesting. What we do want to look at, though, is what do we do in some of these instances? And this screen talks about stress versus burnout. So if you're just having a normal response, stress can be a positive or a negative. It inspires me all the time to meet a deadline. I can tell you, if I didn't care, if I didn't get a little bit stressed out, I wouldn't do what I do, but I do. And so that's not a bad thing up to a point. Burnout and maximal stress, whole different ball game. There's a description here of burnout. If you've ever had it, you don't really need the description. You know what it feels like. And burnout is the perfect term. There's nothing left but the ashes. You're scraping together the ashes to pull yourself together every minute, every hour, every day to respond to your demands. But it's not going to go on much longer because you are burned out. So this slide is called Stress is Specific to Lawyers. I have had this slide in this form or close to this form for years. And it never occurred to me till I was preparing for this program that these are not stresses that are specific to lawyers. These are characteristics of lawyers that lead to stress. And the bullet point pretty much says that, but the title of the slide does not. So perfectionism, okay. If you don't own it, there are a lot of us out there who should own it. If you do own it, that's good news because now we can talk about how to deal with it a little bit later in the program. What I have considered is that perfectionism coupled with the time constraints that we're under, perfect storm. You've got to do it in 5 minutes and it's got to be perfect. How much more stress could you put a person under? Most of us are overachievers, a little bit compulsive, highly competitive, skilled actors wearing the mask. Remember my first slide? By all appearances, here's what's really going on. Nobody knew. We're lawyers. Of course, we're skilled at wearing the mask. Here's one that people don't often think about, I don't think, is over-identification with the job. And the people who over-identify it will take umbrage at the fact that I even call it a job rather than the profession or the work or, a more exalted term. What it is there are people, I am not one of them, but there are many who are, that identify with this work so closely that if they fail or don't have a perfect outcome, it's not I failed and hopefully the outcome will be better next time. I'll do, have another case in a week, hopefully a better outcome, but I'm a failure. That is a whole different ball game and it tears you down. It's an inside job, like I said at the very beginning, and that is very difficult to combat if you're inside beating yourself up, saying, I'm a failure. That leads to nothing but more stress. Secondary trauma, that's not the kind of work I do. I'm a corporate type. I do healthcare law. I draft contracts for employment agreements for physicians and the like all day long. But secondary trauma is when you're dealing with cases where, abuse, for example, and it's so traumatic. The people who went through it obviously are traumatized. So are you. Secretiveness can be an element, preference to look outward, not inward, imposter syndrome. So a lot of younger lawyers talk about that, but I've been interested that if I ever bring that up in a group, older lawyers or more senior attorneys will own that as well. And that's the feeling that somebody's going to discover the wizard behind the curtain, the fact that you don't have all the answers and you might even be wrong sometimes. And that is unacceptable to some people. And that is a characteristic that will lead to a lot of stress. If you feel that being wrong is unacceptable and you've got to wear the mask and show the perfect outward appearance, but inside you're thinking, I'm an imposter. I don't know the answer. I'm going to fake it. I might fake it sometimes, but I don't know the answer. Again, how much more stress could you put yourself under? And by the way, each one of us doesn't just have one of these characteristics. Most attorneys have multiples of these characteristics. And the final one is compassion fatigue, which you can fully understand. Public defenders and judges, again, not my practice, but you get to the point, it's burnout. I don't have anything left. I have listened to as much painful information and had empathy for as many painful situations as I can, and I'm exhausted. And that's what that is. So if you suffer from some of these things and you're to the point of having mental distress or even being extremely stressed, not necessarily mental distress or mental health issues, how do you recognize that? We're on autopilot a lot of times. It's, that draft is due tomorrow. I'm not thinking about myself. I'm thinking about the draft. How do you identify that either you or someone, a colleague or someone is under that kind of stress? And this is a list. There are plenty of other lists you could Google out there. 95 out of 100 times, it's changes. You will notice changes in somebody's behavior. They used to be immaculate. Now they're coming to work and their hair hadn't been washed in 5 days. Their shirt isn't buttoned. They used to, anytime you went by the office and said, "Hey, let's go grab a sandwich." "Oh, yeah, yeah, let me just close out of this. I'm on my way." Now they're, "No, I'm gonna just stick with my office, stay here, I've got some things to do." Those are the tells that there is something wrong. And I will say, like I said, 95 out of 100 times, there is something wrong in those cases. What you choose to do about yourself or others is a different question. We will talk more about that. I know I keep saying that, but we will. This is a slide that I like to talk about, subtleties to watch for. So I've just talked about clear tells, the dirty shirt that hasn't been washed, that kind of thing. But there are far more subtle things to look out for. I give an example of when my family came to town right before they did help me get into Shepherd Pratt. I picked them up at the airport and I said, "I really shouldn't be driving this car." Translation, I am begging you to ask me why so I can tell you what's wrong. And nobody asked. So, I ultimately did ask my brother, but that was me in my mind, but it was subtle, asking for help. I also have a colleague, so this is much more in our field, who during COVID was just under the gun constantly and needed help. She's getting 2 to 4 hours of sleep a night for months. And she was a junior partner and she shares this story. I'm not telling anything out of school. She went to the partner in charge and of wherever she was, different office than mine, and asked for help multiple times. The problem was she put on a big old smile, can-do attitude, asked for help, and never got it. And it got to the point that she had a client, somebody was getting a deposition taken, literally melted down, is sobbing, had to be taken off the stand. And she said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I had a stroke 6 months ago. My doctor said I shouldn't put myself under any stress." And her immediate, not a nanosecond later, thought was, "Gee, maybe if that happened to me, I could get a break." Had a stroke. She was 35. She is now 37 or 8. And she looked at herself and she said, "Something is really, really wrong. And I need to help myself now." And she did. Um, you can read the rest of that. I'm going to move a little bit faster because I know that we've got limited time and there's a lot I want to get to. Suicide warning signs. I want to tell you 2 things. A sudden swing from hopeless to carefree is not necessarily a good sign. It can often mean that someone is at peace because they now have a plan and they know they're going to execute on it. And finally, they're not suffering anymore. They see an out. So don't think necessarily that someone who was hopeless, who's now carefree, that that's a good sign. And don't necessarily think that someone who is hopeless, who then gives you their most important possession, that that's a good sign either, because it may not be. Couple of myths on this order. Myth, never ask somebody if they're contemplating self-harm. It might push them over the edge. The only thing I'm going to say is no. No, period. That's not true. Ask, you might save their lives. And again, I've got a link to the article that I wrote. Another myth is that we no longer have stigma and anybody who needs help is getting it. Not true. study, National Institute of Mental Health, 50% of people with mental illness are receiving treatment. Worldwide, it's worse. So a lot of that has to, okay, you might say, oh, well, there's no access to care. There's not enough care. True. But stigma is still so deeply embedded in the culture. As I say, it's embedded in our very language. You're crazy. She's insane. You're driving me nuts. Sit down for 30 seconds and write down as many as you can think of. You'll be shocked. So, addressing stress in law practice, first in ourselves. This is the second most important slide because this has taken me forever to really break down, but I think I've got it pretty well broken down now. And it's breaking the habits. It's a funny thing. Even addiction, the reason they call it a habit, somebody's got a habit, is while it doesn't sound serious enough, a lot of these things are habits. We do them over and over and over. We've created neural pathways. The grooves are pretty deep after we do it over and over for years, if not decades. But they're habits. They can be broken. What does it take? Work. So here's the whole list of step by step. First is awareness. I mean, you know this. You cannot correct something unless you know what's wrong. So where am I on the well-being continuum? And until recently, I trotted that out and I skipped on to the next step. And somebody pointed out to me, and I said it before, it's not a no-brainer to many, many people to figure out where they are on that continuum. You might need to sit down and really think about it, really do an inventory, get some help to figure it out, to start to understand how you work on the inside. Because a lot of attorneys are not used to thinking that way. We focus on others, we focus on the practice. All of this sounds a little bit woo-woo. We're not necessarily interested in that. There are many who are, but there are some who aren't. And I'm telling you that to break these habits, you are going to have to learn yourself in many ways. The next step is acceptance. So you may be aware of where you are, and you might even be sliding towards the middle of the spectrum. Maybe you're having panic attacks. But you can say to yourself, no, that's not a panic attack. I've got work to do. I'm going to ignore that. You can deny it all day long. This was a wonderful quote that I got at Shepherd Pratt. You can argue with reality and you will lose, but only 100% of the time. Great quote. I don't know how many words that is, but it says it all. So once you accept that you have an issue or that you are stressed to the point that maybe you should do something to address it, well, that's the next step. Prioritization. Okay, I've got an issue. Am I willing to do the work? Do I prioritize this? Do I prioritize it right now? Maybe I've got a big transaction that's going to close in 3 months. And all I can see is getting to the end of that transaction. And no, I'm not willing to do the work right now. Okay, that's a choice. You will continue to be stressed out or whatever place you are on the spectrum for that whole period. But it is absolutely your choice whether you want to do this work or not. I will say, and you saw on that first slide, what my journey has been. I decided after I had recovered a fair amount of stability that my mental health is non-negotiable, and it is. I have more than once, and at least twice, I don't want to make it sound like 50 times, gone into the partner in charge of something and said, this is exactly what I said. I was shaking and crying on the way to work, and I know what that means for me, and I need to be taken off of X project. It was an extra project on top of everything else I was already doing, and they took me off of it. I mean, but the thing is, if I had not been taken off of it, I would have either figured out another way to do it, or I would have left, because my mental health is non-negotiable, 100%. I am never going back to where I've been. Self-discipline. So here is where the rubber meets the road. This is why I have a coach, because this is the thing that I have trouble doing. I know all of this. I'm willing to do the work. My mental health is non-negotiable. But when I'm in the middle of drafting something, the idea of pushing the chair back every hour or whatever it is and getting up and walking around the block or going out in the sunshine, sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't, and I will continue to be stressed out to the extent I don't. And I know that. But like I said, it's a work in progress. I have gotten a lot better about it because I will tell you my own little personal story of recent stress. I got a project at 4:40 in the afternoon on July 3rd. Yes, you would be correct. That was the day before July 4th, the holiday. And it was, I don't know, something like 6 agreements and 4 amendments, each more intricate than the last. And the client wanted it back that day. And I went down the rabbit hole because this was the kind of work that required complete and utter concentration, only to find that some of the things that they had sent weren't correct. So after I'd done a couple of things, I had to go and undo them, and it had to undo them in other agreements as well. So by 7:30, I had electrical pulses in the back of my neck. I had a band that was pulsing right here. I almost pushed through, and I had a saving voice that said no. And I slammed my computer closed, my laptop. I happened to be where my ex-husband was, don't ask. I went and jumped into our little pool that we have at this house, this family house. And just to bring my electrical pulse level down, because I was afraid I was going to have a stroke. And I almost went to the hospital, and I was not positive for the rest of the evening that I was okay. Turned out that I was, but you want to talk about a wake-up call. And I will tell you that it happened again on the Friday before Labor Day, and I said no. I said I finessed it. I didn't just say no, but I finessed it where I did not do the work. I did provide it by Tuesday morning, so I did work over the weekend, but I did not put myself into that maximally stressed state. I won't do it again. So it's another thing that I have learned. That was some self-discipline for me. I know it doesn't sound like much, like any fool would have done that, but it took some self-discipline. So I have a personal prevention plan. I have a maintenance plan. Talk a little more about that. And I just threw stigma in there because I throw it in all the time. Am I willing to ask for help if I need it? Because there are folks who feel the stigma in this area and feel that asking for help as a lawyer is going to make them look weak, or maybe they're not a partner yet and it's going to make their road to partnership more difficult. Your call, your choice. Like I said, I've written an article, I've got it down there, The Language of Asking for Help. I think you can be strategic about it. And just as a quick aside, part of what I talk about, just use the word burnout. Burnout is a badge of honor. Oh, you're burned out. Oh my gosh. You've really, given us your all. Sure, take some time. Okay? I would use the word. Oh, here we go. Core issue for a lot of attorneys: overcoming perfectionism. Give yourself permission to be less than 100% effective. Is that even possible for some of us to do? It isn't for some, but I will tell you it needs to be, because there will never be a time that you don't suffer from stress, an inordinate amount of stress in the practice of law, if you do not come to grips and come to terms with this and work on it. So somebody told me that, well, yeah, but I'm a healthy perfectionist. I don't even know what that means. I wrote, this applies to you unless you're a healthy perfectionist. My guess is maybe 1%. My guess is 0%. I think I was just, feeling, like I would throw that in that day. So a couple of people, ways that they do this is they have these expressions: great is the enemy of good. Don't let perfection get in the way of good enough. That works for some people. If it works for you, take it and use it. Those don't work for me. Frankly, I don't, it just doesn't. That's not my approach. The next one is give yourself permission to be less than 100% effective by triaging. All issues and all tasks are not the same. They're not weighted the same. Set the bar high. If you've got a closing and you're working on the asset purchase agreement, that's an important document. The purchase price that you put in, that's an important number to get right. If I put 2 periods or missed a period somewhere, there are people that stress over that. It really, causes an uptick in their stress level. And I used to be that way. I am here to tell you, it is not a blip on my screen anymore. It is almost an, oh, well, maybe not even that, because I work on getting the important things right. And if I get the really big ticket items right, I literally don't care about the other. I will slough off any stress that might have arisen from those things. So that's my way. But there are other things to do. And on the next slide, I'm going to talk about even a coach that I can highly recommend if you struggle with this. And a lot of this is her information. So she's the one who said, and this is where I get back to healthy perfectionism. I think it's not perfectionism at all. It is the pursuit of excellence. That is as distinguished from perfectionism, which is raw fear. It is fear of getting it wrong. I had that fear. It's the reason I never went after partnership. After 2 years of practicing as an associate in a big law firm, I was terrified of the buck stopping with me. And I never, they called it permanent associate in the day. Now it's counsel or whatever anybody calls it. I have been that for my entire career. I'm not sorry. I've had a great life. I've had a lot of, I've done different things. I've had more time to travel and do other things than some folks who were on partnership track and were partners. But nevertheless, I didn't give myself a choice, not a real choice. I was afraid. And that's where it talks about recognize the toll that perfectionism takes on your performance. It's not in the plus column, like a lot of people think, it's in the minus column. Burnout, overwork, procrastination. If I can't do it perfectly, I'm just going to shove that to the side because I can't handle it. Stifled creativity. I hate to say it, my own mother, not a lawyer, could have been anything, total perfectionist, and as a result, never tried to do much of anything. Brilliant woman, but such a perfectionist. I know this, we never discussed it. She was terrified of failure. I embrace failure. I tell my clients I'm going to make a mistake. I tell them they're going to make a mistake. Sometimes they'll call me and they'll say, oh, I did this. I said, of course you did. Come on. And, they know me, of course, now. And they're like, oh, thank you. Okay, right. I said, was this earth shattering? No. So, in fact, I'll say this a little bit later, I made what I thought was a big mistake one time. Only once have I made one that I thought was big. And I called the client. It covered more than one client within a client, more than one group within a client. And I called everybody and I, threw myself on my sword and to a person literally said to me, did anybody die? No. Okay, we'll fix it. I mean, it was amazing. But I will talk about that later because that's the grace you get from forming relationships. So just sort of drag that back into here. Um, how do you overcome perfectionism? Well, I've given you what I do now. as a tactic, but the answer, and boy, there are some people that are going to want to shut their computers down when I say this, is compassion. And it's just like what I just said for myself and for my client. Am I going to make a mistake? Sure am. Am I going to beat myself up for it? Nope. Why? I have compassion for myself. It's okay. I could beat myself up with the best of them for decades of my life. I don't do that anymore. And it's because I have cultivated compassion for myself. It took a long time. It was work. It didn't come naturally, but I have gotten pretty good at it. The person that I have met virtually who does this kind of coaching is Jordana Confino. I've spoken to her many times. I'm trying to get her to come speak to the entire State Bar of Georgia. She's amazing. And I do have to tell you, I've gotten feedback from a couple of these webinars that I've done, and she has told me that 5 or 6 people have come to her based on this webinar. So clearly, this issue hits home with some folks. If it does for you, do not hesitate to reach out to Jordana. I will vouch for her. This is my own thinking about where we are in this moment and where people are in terms of, sure, if I had an hour to do a yoga class or to sit down and meditate or a mindfulness practice or listen to the Calm app for an hour, of course I know that that would ease my stress. Can't always take the hour, right? Can't always take the hour to go for a walk or go for a swim or do any of these things. So this is something that I had thought of, but it's evidence-based. Don't give up the ship just because you can't take an hour. Commit to doing small things. 3 minutes, 3 deep breaths, 1 deep breath. The stress coach that I have is also a breath work coach, and he will say to me that even 1 deep breath, long deep breath, will relax you, will engage the parasympathetic nervous system a little. It helps. So don't do nothing, double negative. Do something and take a minute, take 5 minutes and you can hit that link because I ran across that. It is evidence-based that even minimal calming activities are helpful and will help you de-stress. When you get overwhelmed, stop. I do, and have a ritual. I will talk about that in a minute. And as I say, these choices are deeply personal. What works for me does not necessarily work for anybody else. I'm going to throw mine in case it does. Personal prevention plan again. What you need to do is identify the source of the stress. You may think you know what it is. You may think, well, of course, it's the billable hours and the client calling me at all times. But I heard someone say the next sentence, and I thought, bingo, because this is true of me. If it's people pleasing, I can spend every hour of the day trying to reduce my billable hours requirement. It will not address the fundamental issue that I jump like Pavlov's dog when I get the email from the client. That's my work, is to just say, they don't value me just for the fact that I can hit send in 5 minutes. They value my experience, the relationship, the work that I do, the way I think. And I know that, like I said, still working on it. For you, figure out what works for you. I think a lot of offices offer in-house yoga, for example, or they have in-house Peloton classes or whatever they have. If you detest Peloton, don't think about it for 5 seconds. That's not going to work for you. In fact, it's even more stress. Think about what does work for you. There are a number of apps that people use that really are good in terms of convenience. You can set the duration. They don't cost a ton of money. You might derive a lot of relief and even a lot of pleasure. Take a look. I am well aware that people are sitting there saying, okay, this is great, but I'm a stay-at-home mom. I practice out of my house. I've got small children who are in school. One has a learning disability. How do you think I'm supposed to do this? I don't have your answer. I couldn't possibly have your answer. All I can tell you is be creative, snag the moments that you can, breathe, because you have to breathe anyway. Learn how to breathe where it will help de-stress you. But I don't have an answer, and I don't think anyone else does. Be creative and do the best you can in this moment. My personal ritual when I feel overwhelmed, and I was very surprised to find that this is science, it's actually scientific. There's science behind this. So once I become foggy and confused, and I'm looking at the screen and my eyes are crossed, and I can't make sense of it no matter what, I stop. I don't care what I'm doing. I stop. I know that at that point, I'm no longer effective at my job, and I shouldn't type anything because whatever I did, it would be wrong. What I do is I make a to-do list in order of priority. What's the big task, all the way down. But whatever I was doing before, I ignore it. And instead, I take the easiest thing on the list, something I can do blindfolded, and I do it. And that begins to restore, my faith in myself, and it begins to calm me down. And if at all possible, I wait until the next day or at least a few hours to do the thing that sent me into orbit. And I will tell you 100 out of 100 times when I open it, whenever I do, and look at it, I know how to do this. Like, what was my problem? My problem was I was in fight or flight mode, and I couldn't do it then, but now I'm not, and I've calmed down and it's all good. I have talked about being smart about self-care, being smart, for example, about how you ask for help. Here's a little bit more on that. I got some of this from in-house counsel because I didn't realize, I guess I'm, sort of behind the curve in knowing this. It used to be that going in-house was when you wanted an easier job, basically 9 to 5, go home. It is so not that anymore. They all tell me it's like drinking from a fire hose. And they do have 1,000 emails in their inbox, and here's what they do. They scan them. They don't even answer the ones they don't have to, ever. If it becomes important, somebody will email them back. They will triage. They will assess and prioritize the risk. How could this impact my organization if I don't deal with it? They look at the subject line, maybe a line. If it could hurt the organization, boom, they're going to open it. If not, on to the next thing. And it occurred to me that I also do this in risk management for myself. I am always aware of who or to whom I am sending an email. If it's the partner in charge of my healthcare group that I've worked with for years and has my back, I don't necessarily scrutinize it 8 times. I'll look at it, I'll take a good glance. Yeah, that's probably what I wanted to say. If I miss something, or she has a question, she'll email me back, no problem. If it's to a difficult client, I'm looking at that thing 12 times and making sure that I got it right, because I will not knowingly send an email that I haven't scrutinized to someone who can hurt me or hurt my career. That's how I look at it. There is also something I learned in a past position in-house in Virginia. Draft emails that sell you to the recipient. Don't draft an email with long paragraphs to a client who thinks and talks in bullet points. Send them bullet points, short and sweet. I know you've got a lot to say. Figure out another way to say it, because they are not going to read all those paragraphs, and they're going to love you if you send them a few short bullet points. And then we get to what I spoke about before, build relationships. It all comes down to relationships. Only then will you get grace for your mistakes, like I did that time, where the client actually comforted me, which was pretty shocking. It is the key to creating peace within your practice. I'm not the only one who says that. I host a podcast for the Georgia Bar, and I interviewed a younger lawyer who does a lot of trial work. And that was his statement, is he builds relationships, and that is the key to creating peace within his practice. And I borrowed that because it's true for me too. Okay, addressing stress in others. This is going to be quick. Listening to listen and understand, not to what I call reload. I heard that, lawyers listen to reload. You're 4 steps ahead. They're going to say this, I'm going to say that. They're going to say this, I'm going to say that. That's not how you listen to someone who's trying to tell you about their struggles or who is stressed out. You listen to understand. And I have a few notes about how to listen effectively. Don't listen so that you can respond and fix it. That's not what they're looking for. They want to be heard. So be quiet and listen. But the other thing is very personal. I've had it happen where, I've had some pretty dire things happen, and I'll come up with a statement. Well, when I was inpatient and somebody flinches, game over. Game over. I'm not saying another word. I'll end that conversation, go somewhere else if I'm needing somebody to talk to. The only way you can retrieve it, in my experience, if you flinch, is to address it directly. I know I just startled a little bit. I just sort of wasn't ready, but now I've got my listening cap on. I really want to hear everything you've got to say. I'm here for you. I would have spoken. I would have come back to somebody like that. But barring that, absolutely not. Don't make it about you. I listened to more conversations when people during COVID were trying to describe deep experiences they were having, and somebody would chime in and say, "Oh, I know that happened to me," and launch off onto something and completely take from the person the healing they were getting from having the audience. Just don't do that. But I have also been told, don't say never to that, because occasionally someone opens the door and they actually want to hear your experience. And if you sense that, or if you're invited in, then tell your experience, but don't overshare and don't burden that person. They're burdened enough. Okay, addressing our stress in ourselves and others. So this is out of the box. I'm throwing it out there. I personally have seen such support in a private moderated Facebook group. Any number of people, attorneys, doesn't have to be your firm or group. Anyone could start this. Make it private. You've got your people who support you. You can, I've seen people where someone was always online at 2 a.m. and somebody would post in the group and there was somebody there for them. If you want to create that or feel that you could and want it, it's a great idea. Similar ideas, conversation circles. It's basically the same idea, just not necessarily on Facebook. Often what I find happens is I give a talk like this in person, and everybody's asking questions and everybody's all excited, and there's unity and there's community, and they're dropped because there's no attempt made to follow that up. So I think that there should be scheduled a follow-up for people who want to do that. Just my thinking. Why do these work? Community. 100% community. I can tell you that when I went into Shepherd Pratt after 8 months, where you could wipe the floor with me, I had nothing left. The first night I went in, a bunch of people were playing poker. Well, they wouldn't let you have money, but we played with sugar packets. So Splenda was $1. The blue one, whatever that is equal, was $5, and Sweet and Low was 10 or something. It was the first time in months that I felt remotely okay because I was with a community. It was community. I can't overstate the value of community. Lawyer assistance programs. So I talked about that briefly. I want you to know that your state, wherever you are, has one. They're listed by state on the ABA's website. So take a look at that link. They have all the resources on there. I did put a note that EAPs and LAPs presently are pretty overloaded. I've heard that anecdotally. You can sometimes wait a month. You can wait longer to get a therapist or a counselor. Many states have peer volunteer programs, exactly what that sounds like, peer-to-peer, that can help. And there's some online peer programs that I'll tell you about. I don't know why I have New York in here. I'm in Georgia, but at any rate, this is a slide about what New York has. So if you're from New York, take a look at that. They have 4 no-cost sessions. We have 6 in Georgia per issue per calendar year. So, check into what you've got. Pure volunteer programs, like I said. So North Carolina, this is what they say about theirs. It is simply, and that's if you have ever been in 12-step, sharing experience, strength, and hope is a 12-step approach. And that is simply, I've walked the walk, talk to me, I can help you because I've been where you are now. Georgia has the only online matching program. We've worked very hard to put it together. If by chance there's anybody listening to this who has interest in implementing that in their state, give me a call. We'd be happy to share the wealth on that. Again, New York. So if you're from New York, have a look. Other resources, BetterHelp is an app. All I hear is excellent reports on that. To me, from what I've heard, that's the gold standard. They also have a great list of resources, but I'm saying the app itself, which connects people with therapists and offers a whole bunch of wonderful tools, is supposed to be really, really good. I've talked a lot about large, medium-sized firms, corporations, haven't said anything about small firms or solos. That because it's not my experience, but it's not like I'm not aware of the stresses that those practitioners can be under. And the best thing I've heard for those folks is an accountability buddy. It's somebody, if you're solo, obviously outside of your practice, a small firm may still be outside of your firm, who you check in with and who will tell you if you're going off track. If you're going off the rails, they will hold you accountable and say, you need to go get some help or you need to take some time or whatever it is. But I thought it was a really, really good idea. Community support, 12 steps, an example. There are a million community support programs. Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, I happen to know, is very good. The Lawyer Depression Project is an online peer support program out of New York. Online, it doesn't matter where you are, but it happens to be out of New York. It is not about depression. I think they're working on changing their name. It started with that name. Everything, anxiety, bipolar, depression, stress, everything is under their umbrella. They do a wonderful job. They have support groups, they have meetings, virtual, and I think their website is Knowtime, KNOWTIME.com. But if you click on the link, you'll figure out how to get in touch with them. I've listed some apps that I've heard of. Should have included BetterHelp, but I've got it up top. Clubhouse, you have to be judicious. I've gone to some meetings at Clubhouse or some groups at Clubhouse that were great. There are some that are not good at all. You just have to pick and choose. Dinner party was something someone told me about that is specifically for families struggling with suicide, loss, or grief. It's supposed to be very good. I never talked about this before, but I have tremendous experience with medication. I was on meds for 26 years, I think. Really thought there was going to be a magic bullet. So I was on 2 meds, 3 meds, 4 meds, at a time. Never did help, sometimes hurt, because that was not my issue. I did not have a chemical imbalance, although I fully believe that some people do. I will say that everyone I've talked to who is a professional in the area, I did go looking for an article, didn't see a lot of literature about it, but says that meds alone are not what they prefer. It's meds and talk therapy together is what they look for recovery. I'm just throwing it out there because I wanted to mention it because I know many people use psych meds. I think one thing to know that people don't talk about up front, and you should ask, is what are the withdrawal symptoms if you're to go off of this? Because I've been on psych meds that withdrawal was somewhat like going off of heroin, and I had to titrate down over 6 months, and I was at the end cutting powder and still needed to be doing that because it was still withdrawal. So I would ask that question, even if it's not raised by your psychiatrist who is prescribing the meds. Look at leadership. Well, this is a bottom-up, top-down issue to me in law firms or corporations or anywhere. It's got to come from the top. People who are stressed is what I talk about, the community of folks. That's coming bottom up. But if leadership doesn't buy into this, you're going to have a tough time getting traction where you are. And I've seen cases where leadership buys into it in name only, and that's not very helpful either. First thing, create a safe environment for somebody to come forward without fear of penalty. For example, making partner. I've heard that over and over and over. I'm up for partner this year. I don't dare tell people that I'm having panic attacks and, or I'm depressed and it's hard to get out of bed because I won't make partner. I don't have an answer for that. I would hope that more and more we're opening up that dialogue with management and with the leadership, and that they will make this a safe space. Leaders should be modeling this. They should be hosting speakers for lunch. I have a couple of leaders in the space. I have quotes. U.S. Bank is a real leader in the space. Lori Pines, Chief Wellness Officer and litigator, by the way, at Wild Gottschall, is enormous in the space, very powerful in the wellness movement, as are many, many, many people. There is a big wellness movement, but we're still dragging some folks along, and we've got a long way to go. And of course, they can sign the ABA Wellbeing Pledge, which you may never have heard about, but which I will talk about. Just going to mention some institutional best practices. And you can look at some of them, they're sort of obvious. The one I really want to highlight is make sure you've got a defined back to work policy after a mental health or rehab leave. Don't throw that person back into the deep end. I can tell you that it's like being in a cocoon. I had a car wreck 2 days after I came out of Shepherd Pratt. Not bad, but I just rolled up behind somebody at a light because I forgot to put the brakes on. I had been in such a cocoon. I have heard people say that a partner in their firm, for example, wanted to be thrown back in because they were worried other people were going to take their clients. They were worried, about, getting right back in. Don't let somebody do that. Assure them that their clients will be their clients. People need a ramp up period, in my opinion, and in many people's opinion. So for what it's worth, I hope that you can implement that kind of thing. ABA has a lot of good information. The Wellbeing Pledge, I have a link to. I'm going to show you the Wellbeing Pledge in a minute, and this is it. So Patrick Krill, whom I mentioned in connection with the study published in 2016 about lawyer, stress and suicidal ideation and anxiety and stress and all, he is the father of the ABA Wellbeing Pledge, along with others, but it is really his baby. And this is something that's been signed by a number of firms, law firms, corporations, all kinds of folks, as a framework to sort of hang your hat on. We never had this before. It was always, well, we should help people be well, but what does that mean? This is what it means. Two things I just want to point out that are interesting. The two most difficult points for firms to actually fulfill here are number two, disrupting the status quo of drinking-based events. I didn't know, but we're still a real drinking culture. And it's number, wherever it is, about defined back to work policy. I think it's 5. That's very, very hard for folks to get their arms around. I think there's a sample of such policy on the ABA website, or maybe on the IWIL site, which is the Institute for Wellbeing and Law. Take a look at it. It's out there for you. All their information and resources are free for you. They're tremendous resources. Please take a look. And thank you. Getting back to what I said at the beginning, call me, email me. More than happy to answer any questions. If there's something you want me to flesh out, very happy to do it, and very happy to have had the privilege and the opportunity to speak with you today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lynn, for being here with us today. Now we can go ahead and jump into our audience questions. It looks like we already have a few, but if you do have any questions for Lynn that you'd like to ask now, please feel free to click that Q&A button at the control panel at the bottom of your screen and submit them. You can go ahead and get started. Okay, Lynn, it looks like our first question is, how can I determine what technique or activity is most effective for myself to maintain my mental health?
Question. You're the only person, obviously, who can figure that out. And like with many things, when people will say they're going to retire, for example, and what am I going to do? Think about the things you like. Make a list of the things you like that you enjoy doing. I think I said at one point, if your firm offers yoga or Peloton and you absolutely detest it, don't give it a second thought. That's not what you're going to do. Do something that you really will do that gives you some pleasure and relaxation. I told you, for me, it's swimming. I'm very fortunate that I've got a pool in the basement of where I live. It's not just fortunate, I actually picked the building and everything based on that, because at any given moment, if I'm really feeling stressed, I can go get in the water, and that is very, very soothing to me. So pick things like that and look, there are lists. Look at lists, Google relaxation techniques. You never know what's going to work. You may have to try a few things before you find what works for you. I'm, for example, trying to gear up to get back into hot yoga. It was very good for me. I did it for years. I quit for years. It's a tough practice, but that's something that I know would be good for me. So I'm sort of half, when I said do things that you like, I sort of half like it. So, but I know it's great for me. So that's something I'm thinking about, for example.
Thank you so much. Our next question just came in. It says, how do we reconcile that using the quote unquote stresses/characteristics specific to lawyers makes us good at what we do at the cost of leading to burnout? It seems like playing with fire.
Well, that's the work. You nailed it right there. It's taking what works out of those characteristics and leaving the rest. That is literally what it is. It's flipping the idea of perfectionism from I'm going to get hurt if I do this wrong to I'm human, I'm going to make mistakes, but I do pursue excellence because that's how I'm built. It's how I want to practice law. That's a goal of mine. It's relanguaging, reframing. You can do it. I've done it. I know it sounds like if you read the words and they apply to you, how could you ever change those things? But what you have to do is dissect those things and find, like I said, the parts, just like with what I just said about perfectionism, that work for you and leave behind the ones that don't. And again, it's work. It's not like it's going to happen overnight, especially, for example, the perfectionism, that was a lifelong trait for me. And I'll tell you a quick story. I must have been fertile ground. The way I got out of that was I was at Shepherd Pratt, and I've given a lot of anecdotes from Shepherd Pratt, but they did some good things. And one of the techniques was called acceptance and commitment therapy. And it was about sort of thinking intellectually. It's the idea that what you think creates your emotional state, which then impacts your stress level and all that. It's not a concept that's not out there. But what this guy did was say to me, I've got an assignment for you. And oh, good. I'm a lawyer. I like to have assignments. The assignment, he said, was to write whatever it was and then not to finish it. I was like, wait, you're kidding. You're giving me an assignment and the assignment is not to complete it. Yep. That was anxiety provoking for me, believe it or not. But I went back to my room that night. I half wrote up whatever it was, brought it back, and the sky didn't fall in and the ground didn't open up beneath my feet. And like I said, it was a small thing, so I must have been ready to do it. But from then on, I really stopped. I stopped being a perfectionist and really started to parse through, what do I care about? I want to be good at what I want to do. I want to, have good relationships with my clients. But I know I'm going to get things wrong. In fact, as you can probably tell from the talk, take great pleasure in telling people that I'm going to do things wrong. It's a relief. It's a release. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. We have time for a couple more questions. So our next one is, how about the stress on legal secretaries? I believe we endure a lot of stress and bring it home as well.
You're absolutely right. And in my firm, we're very careful when we do programming, to include staff. I think there's two things to think about. Some programming is by its nature for attorneys. If you're talking about how to draft a brief with the least amount of stress or something, well, typically it would be the attorney drafting the brief. So that's not so much for staff. But the program I just did, I'm talking about attorneys, but tons of that could be applicable to staff, to secretaries, to tech support, to anybody. So one thing is to include staff in the programming. Now, the other thing is, how do you treat your staff? What kind of deadlines do you give them? Do you turn around and dump the same thing on them that the client or senior partner or whoever is dumping on you because you're all stressed out? So, it all just blows downhill. Well, if you really care about that person's stress level, you will make a better effort to do time management. It's very interesting. I can't remember his name, but there's a partner at Morrison Manning in Atlanta that was just written up in the New York Times 6 months ago. He went public about not mental health issues, but just stress, and how he really needed to step back and take some time. And it was, he really became a public figure with it. And I went and spoke to him because I was interested. He's in my town. It's in Atlanta. I wanted to talk to him. And I said, well, what do you say about the fact that the answer that somebody's going to give when they really, all else fails and they're sort of resisting this is, well, I'd love to do this, but this is all client driven. The client is making the demands, and boy, I can't do anything about that. I was so shocked. He sort of sat back and he said, never thought of that. I'm like, really? Because that's all I ever hear. He said, well, maybe that's about 15% of it. The other 85% is mismanagement. This is a managing partner at a firm. That's all I know how to tell you. So I would just say time management, case management, and that can work outside and it can also work inside.
Okay, I think the last question that we have time for today is going to be this one coming up. It's, how do you ask for help in a society where mental health is a stigma? It's changing, but it's still difficult.
Tough question. And I noticed you said in society, not in a law firm. Well, I go back to what I said. Doing it alone is really, really hard. If you have anybody you trust that can be with you, it doesn't even have to be just one person, a couple of friends that you trust that can help you walk through that, that's the way to go. And then start looking, like I know in my community what's available. See if you can find somebody like me who will give you advice on, what's out there that's any good, because there's a lot out there that's not necessarily that great. But getting back to, being able to ask because of the way society is, again, you can language it a little bit differently. Like I said in the program, talk about being burned out and, where could I go for help? That's code. It's literally code, but it works because, like I said, burnout is a badge of honor, and people are going to fall all over themselves to help you find somebody because you're just burned out, and they'll just get you fixed right up and get you back on track. And then you can be a productive citizen again. So I think language is a big part of it. sit down and look at what there is in your community and go online, go on the Lawyer Depression Project and ask in those peer groups, ask them. Those folks are wonderful. Ask them what they think is the answer to that question, because it is tough and stigma is still there. I hold out a lot of hope for millennial on down that they're going to change the world, but they're not in the positions of power yet to be able to do it on their own. So I figure people like me, we just have to hold the line and do the best we can until they come along. And then these things hopefully are not even going to be problems because they don't feel the stigma. I have a 27-year-old daughter. She talks about mental health, like I've said, I'm going to buy the groceries. So I think that is changing, like the question said. But I think you're smart to recognize that there's still stigma and just be strategic and careful about it. And if you're really not in good shape and can't think that way, find somebody you trust who can help you.
Thank you, Lynn, for all of your insight and your presentation. And thank you all for asking your questions. That's all we have time for today. So I'm going to go ahead and hand things back over to Marina to wrap things up.
Yes, thanks, Nina, and thank you, Lynn. This was fantastic. And thanks to all of you for being here. We really hope that you were able to learn something in this presentation and that it'll be helpful for you moving forward in your practice and managing your stress. We are all so glad that you took advantage of those free Justia Connect benefits to be here today and hear from Lynn and get these strategies for success. And we just want to remind you that you also have various other Justia Connect benefits you can take advantage of as part of your practice and your professional growth. So those of you with the free Justia Connect membership, you've got benefits out there from available to you, like your Justia Lawyer Directory profile, like some of those savings and discounts. So definitely check those out for you. Those of you with the upgraded Connect memberships, you've got even more benefits available to you, like the CLE that is available for this course. I thank all of you for being here today, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next video.